I'm Marc Weber of the Computer History Museum, and I'm here on January 29th, 2025 with Gary Morgenthaler. And this is a somewhat of a follow-up to the oral history he gave us in 2005, but focusing on his role in Siri. And thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to sort of backfill a little bit from what you said in 2005, looking at the personal assistant thread. So I think, well, were you aware, not many people seem to be, about the paper with Licklider and Bob Taylor, the computer as a communications device, they talked about the Oliver personal assistant.
I recall.
Okay. Did that make any impression or not particularly?
I don't think the Siri team ever discussed that directly. That was part of the folklore of the industry, I think, from earlier time. We did discuss the Apple Knowledge Navigator, which had made an impression on the team. I think General Magic had made an impression on the Siri team. There was an awful lot of AI priors that made impressions on the team that sort of created and shaped their vision on the one hand. And Adam Cheyer himself had been pursuing an AI vision, an agentic AI vision from the early 1990s that he really formulated very early in his life and career and carried with him through the early series days, and I think to this day he carries that vision.
And the Knowledge Navigator, that was not particularly on your radar at the time?
I had seen the demo. It was clear that this was a vision thing and not a product. It was formulated in the it was part of the Apple Newton vision, but it was well exceeded the reality of Apple Newton, which was not compelling.
And I know you were in relational databases in that era.
I was.
Tymshare, by the way, we have done oral histories with Ann Hardy, Norm Hardy, and Leroy Times. And several other Tymshare
all good friends of mine.
Really.
Amazing people. It was that place was a hotbed of talent for sure.
And did you, when Doug's group came in, were you working with them? Did you have much contact with them?
So let me back up a step. I first came to California and then worked at a Stanford laboratory called Institute for Math Studies and the Social Sciences. There, I was assigned part-time to the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Labs as a liaison between the laboratories. I thought their lab was much more interesting than our lab, so I spent all the time I could at Stanford Artificial Intelligence Labs, SAIL so-called. And I felt I'd been parachuted 50 years into the future. We can talk about that. This was John McCarthy and his team, legendary people in the days. From when I left Stanford in 1973 and joined Tymshare, to join and work ultimately in the operating systems design group and then manage an engineering group there. I maintained a relationship with Stanford Artificial Intelligence Labs, but I also had interviewed first with Doug Engelbart, and he offered me a job to work at SRI. So I was very intrigued with what he was doing, but I thought it was well in advance of practical uses. I wanted to do something practical in industry. Tymshare was doing that, so I went off to do operating system design with Norm Hardy, Ann Hardy, Leroy Times, a whole bunch of very talented people.
And did you know Spires, which, I'm thinking of the database connection later, but the Spires database, which was done at Stanford, and Jacques Vallée did early versions of that. He later worked for Doug.
Jacques Vallée is a good friend.
Okay.
Marc, I know all these people. So you're taking me back here. But no, Jacques worked for Institute for the Future.
Later, yeah.
Yeah, later at IFF. And I was not impressed with the early databases, to be blunt.
Okay.
They were hard to program. It was hard to get data. To get your data in and out, you had to write a program. That was too painful and costly. When I saw a relational database and met Michael Stonebreaker, I said, this is the right idea. And I spent the next 15, 18 years doing that. And we had a wonderful time. It's a whole story in itself. Created an entire industry, changed the world. It was the right idea for sure.
And Spires, you weren't particularly, because Jacques, I did an oral history with him.
Yeah.
He talked about, I guess his earlier vision for Spires was somewhat different than what Stanford did later. But it's not that there was no particular cross-fertilization. The Spires also, as I'm sure you know, became important as the first U.S. website at Slack, where they put Spires on the web.
Okay.
But I mean, that doesn't sound like, I'm fishing for a few cross connections, that's why.
So,
just to check them off.
So the connections I would make, coming back to Siri, the connections I would make are that the original vision of AI was a vision that really brought all the pieces of intelligence together in a common framework and a common understanding. So that was natural language understanding, speech recognition, domain knowledge, knowledge management, dialogue management, the ability to communicate as humans do. But that was viewed as one, common range of intelligence, and that to be an intelligence system, you had to be able to master all of these piece parts. What happens inevitably in any academic setting is that when things get really hard, you specialize. And each of these became their own domain, and people began to work within domains, became very specialized, focused on exactly that problem to make progress, understandably. But then these domains were very separate, and then bringing them back together seemed a bridge too far. In fact, through the 1980s and 1990s, I think our firm counted there were more than 50, less than 100 speech recognition startups. Everyone failed. And there were only two, I think, that survived. One,
Dragons. Right?
Dragon was one, and Houpsby out of Belgium was the other. So when I went to my partners in 1997 with Nuance Communications and said, this is going to succeed, they said, are you crazy? Everyone has failed. This is a problem that's too hard. And I said, no, here it's going to succeed, and here's why. And it sold to Microsoft for $19 billion, so I would categorize that as a success. It became the foundation for Google's speech. The emigres from Nuance formed Google speech recognition, formed Apple speech recognition, Microsoft speech recognition. So Nuance was the seedbed for speech recognition. Everything else followed from that.
But tell the Nuance story,
Yeah.
your involvement. So how did you, because I don't think you did talk about that in your 2005 oral history.
There's so many things to talk about.
I mean, that's an example of something
Sure.
at the time
Yeah.
may not have risen to the top.
But
Now it looks important in retrospect.
Very.
So tell me how you learned of them. What was your interest in that area?
So there was an investment banker, Alan Herzig, who was working with SRI at the time. And he said, Gary, you really need to get to know SRI. There was a new CEO coming in, Kurt Carlson. Introduced me to Kurt, and we became fast friends immediately. Working with Kurt was Norman Winarski, who ultimately came on the Siri board with me. He became, Norman incubated Siri within SRI and built the original team. It was called Active Technologies to begin with at the time of formation. Later changed its name at my behest and others. And so I got to know the SRI team. Norman Winarski formed a venture spin-out organization called nVention. nVention ultimately spun out scores of companies. And I served on this board for 25 years, helping SRI think through how to productize its various technologies and bring those technologies to market. It was a blast. Norm is a very close friend to this day, fabulous person. Kurt Carlson also. And it was a great period for SRI of innovation, and out of that came both Nuance, which I funded originally. I served on the board of directors with Kurt Carlson, and then Siri later, which also spun out of nVention. And the Siri team gave you a wonderful interview. I highly recommend it for anybody who hasn't seen it. So, and that's the background.
So Nuance, and what year roughly did you fund Nuance?
1997, I believe.
And how long was it independent before Microsoft bought it?
Oh, okay. So Nuance went public in 2004 or so. And by 2005, approximately 2003, 2004, it went public. Might have been earlier. Approximately then, and approximately 2005, it merged with SpeechWorks. The SpeechWorks, with that merger, our firm sought liquidity, sold our shares, and then Nuance continued for another more than a decade, probably 15 years, and sold in 4 or 5 years ago to
yeah, because I thought it was much more
recent.
Yeah.
Much more recent, yeah.
Okay. But they remained independent and...
Yep.
But, well, you'll get to the Siri connection. Okay, so just tell sort of sequentially. So starting roughly in that late 90s, early 2000s, you did tell Luann about, I guess, yeah, you went through into the early 2000s, but maybe just pick it up around then, around the dot-com crash.
So, well, the dot-com crash was an absolutely miserable period, I'll just say. I went through 3 years. I was on 8 or 10 boards at a time, which is a lot. And I went through 3 years of every board meeting cutting back staff and making very hard choices about who is it that you can continue to employ with the capital that you have, because there's no more available. So that was a challenging period through about 2003. And after that, some hard lessons learned by a lot of venture capitalists, myself included. And one of those was never run out of money, which was a cardinal sin in venture capital. So I met the Siri team. I had known Adam Cheyer through nVention, and he presented multiple times various product ideas to the nVention team, which was probably 8 or 10 venture capitalists in a real sort of firing squad. It was waterboarding torture for entrepreneurs, and they would bring in this, the untrained entrepreneurs from SRI, and they would, get a full dose of venture capitalists. So, but Adam was different and very compelling. And I really thought that, if he ever comes up with something that's a real product idea, I would be interested in funding it. So in 2008, late 2007, Dag Kittlaus had come as an entrepreneur in residence and had been walking the halls, had met Adam, had formed a good friendship, saw the Kalo project, became interested in what could be done with this, and began to fashion a vision. And Dag is quite extraordinary, as is Adam and Tom Gruber, of course. But Dag is a great marketeer. He defines himself, calls himself a storyteller. He's magnificent at it. And so you had the beginnings there of world-class engineering and vision with technology vision with Adam, user interface with Tom Gruber, and marketing and product vision and user understanding about value proposition with Dag Kittlaus. So you really had the core of a team with these three people. So Norman Winarski had prepared them for the venture capital gauntlet in the real world, in real life, as they say. And they came out and they went out to friendlies first. So I was a friendly, having been on the nVention board. And they came in and presented to me, and I think Dag will tell the story that that I listened to the talk, and I politely said, never show me those slides again, and never show anyone those slides again, or you will never get funded. So it was...
what was wrong with what they showed?
The financial extrapolations, the market extrapolations, were fanciful. They were not based in any kind of reality. And so, and I was just trying to coach them. I wasn't trying to give them a hard time. Our job is only to support entrepreneurs and help them. And I said, here's what you need to do. Here's what the story needs to be. Go back and think about it. They came back in 2 weeks. Honestly, Marc, every idea that I'd put forward, every problem I'd mentioned, everything I'd suggested was fixed. And not only was fixed, but it was better than I had suggested they make. And I sat back and I said, okay, this team learns, and they learn fast. They listen, they learn fast. And I think if there's a single way to characterize the Siri team was, it was the fastest learning team I've ever worked with. It was stunning. It was really astonishing. We had 24 board meetings after we financed the company in January of 2008. And we had 24 board meetings approximately over the next 2-year period, one a month. Every meeting, it was a different company because every meeting, they had taken the input from the board, the team had made progress, they had solved problems, and when we came back, the set of problems we were working on as a board, as a team, were different problems because the last ones were solved. So I'm so used to going to company meetings where you're same problem over and over again. Every company meeting was a different set of problems because those are solved. Well, the ones that we had last time, they're solved. So it was so much fun. And the team was so smart, they listened so carefully, and they were so talented at coming up with creative solutions and think through problems that it was a really fun, compelling experience as a VC. You're off the sidelines you're on the sidelines as an entrepreneur. You're no longer the entrepreneur, they're the entrepreneur. Your job is to ask intelligent questions and sufficient, even if you know the answer, your job is to ask the question so that they think of the answer and then they own the answer. So this team thought of the answer, owned the answer, solved the problem, and now we're on to the next.
So in their interview, they talked about they were presenting to other VCs when you called, and they told them in the meeting, sorry, we're already funded. What was that call?
I'm honored by that. And the other VCs that we're talking to were very good VCs, so I doubly honored.
Can you say who they are? Don't.
I do not disrespect my peers, but they're very good VCs. So I think what I had formed was a relationship with them where they thought I could add value in terms of thought leadership and in terms of problem solving, in terms of collegiality, collaborative working relationship. And that proved to be the case. In fact, to this day, they're very good friends.
But that call was after where in the timeline you just gave? So they had presented to you, the first presentation wasn't great. They came back. So is this presumably after the second presentation?
Yes, the second presentation they had presented, and I had gone back to our partnership to say, this is the deal I want to champion. Now, this is, venture capital firms have different characteristics. Our firm over the years has been a very data-driven. You do the homework, make the calls, do the due diligence, do the work, and make sure that everything is buttoned up and tied down. So I had a lot of to-do list from my partners before we could make a proposal. I finally got that done. And let me back up a second, Mark. You have to recall that even though at this point Nuance was successful and I had sort of proven the idea that speech recognition could be a success, natural language understanding, which, speech recognition previously was too hard. No one will ever succeed at this. Okay, Nuance succeeded, so I have some credibility on this particular topic. AI's been through 3 AI winters. The first in the 70s, another in the 80s, another in the 90s. Overhyped and then underperformed. And so natural language was too hard, never going to be a problem to solve. We don't have the tools. Don't even think about it. Everybody's failed. And I said, no, this group is going to get it right, is going to get it done. I believe in them. Let's invest. So that took some time to persuade my partners. I was at the second meeting, I would have written a check if I could have. Just because of how quickly they learned, how carefully they listened, how talented the team was, and how compelling the vision was. I got it, understood, saw the opportunity, saw the vision, believed in it. Now I had to persuade my partners. So that took less than 2 weeks, but entrepreneurs move fast, the teams move fast. They had one check from Menlo Ventures, and they were looking for the second partner. And so I persuaded my partners in that time frame. I think we're back in less than 2 weeks. I called Dag. He was in a meeting. Happily, he said yes.
And what was it? So you had to convince your partners, but what had you seen other than knowing the people, and obviously you knew their pedigree, but
yeah.
What were they showing you? Was there any demo that you could see? How did you know they had cracked this very, very old and hard problem?
So I knew pieces of it worked. I'd seen some demos of natural language understanding at SRI. And I'd seen some of Adam's technology. I'd seen presentations on Kalo. Kalo, frankly, was a little Frankensteinian. I would just say it was like pieces from 27 different laboratories all glued together into something that was more of a demo, I thought, than a product. But I just believed, at some point you ask enough questions of the people to understand their depth of knowledge and their engineering skills, their ability, and their execution, their management and leadership skills. So at some point, venture capital is intuitive. You have to make a judgment about the people. And you also have to make a judgment about the maturity of the technology and the ability to fashion this into a product that people want. So to your question, did they have a demo? I think they had a rudimentary demo. It was, they were able to give a few rudimentary demonstrations of what kinds of questions you could ask, what kinds of answers you could get back. And that was persuasive, but less than compelling. So, but the people were compelling.
So ultimately it was somewhat of a leap of faith even for you on the people.
Yes, but venture capital, of course, is not it's not a 6-month or 12-month turnaround. You're thinking of 5, 7, 10 years even of what's the trajectory of this, where will it be in that time frame, what value can you create, what problems do you have to solve, and who are you working with to do those things. And I was convinced that this team would get it done and that it would be successful and it would be worth my time and our firm's capital.
So you convinced your partners to and then you made the call and immediately started. But were they thinking of, what I recall from the panel is that they weren't thinking of selling. I mean, they wanted to IPO and take it. So tell me about, what was the initial thinking of where this would go?
Well, can I tell you a few stages along the way?
Please.
Yeah. So, Mark, I said earlier that every board meeting was a different set of problems, that this team was very proactive and very focused on execution. By one metric, here's a metric for you. I think Chris Brigham, one of the early technologists, did 24 months 2,500 code submissions. So and you had 24 of these people ultimately working like crazy, iterating so fast. The rate of iteration and change and progress was really compelling. So again, every month was solving different problems, but there was a huge range of problems. Let me describe them. There were user interface problems. There were fundamental, problems in natural language understanding. Natural language is very ambiguous. And, they cite in their interview that if you say, I'm going to the Giants game and you're in New York, you're talking about football. You say, I'm going to the Giants game and you're in San Francisco, you're talking about baseball. So what is the context of your comment? Therefore, how can I disambiguate what you said so that I know what you meant? So the real question is, what's your intention? Natural language is a means of expressing intention, but you need context to understand it. And I'm going to put a marker here to say we should talk at the end about how Siri presaged what's happening in natural language understanding in AI today with the transformer model and attention model, because Marc, my argument to you is Siri solved the same set of problems with a different set of technologies, but they faced the same problems of language disambiguation, intent understanding, and trying to make a domain knowledge choice and execution based on an earlier technology set, and they still got it done, and indeed, in some ways, better than has been done today. But we'll come back to that if you want.
Definitely, okay. Yes.
So 24 months, many problem solving. I have to tell you that it didn't always look great. It sometimes looked fairly bleak in terms of the natural language understanding. The ambiguity problems were such that you would get back silly answers from the natural language understanding, or just completely incorrect answers, or vector you off in a wrong domain, make bad choices. And you're looking at this and saying, wow, is this ever going to work? So 2008, we were just building the team, setting up the technology and so forth. 2009, we were hard at work, code submissions, building product. Summer of 2009, I have to say, it was, I didn't doubt that it would eventually work. I doubted that we would have enough to show to get an up financing round, by the time we ran out of money. And that time was fast approaching in the summer of 2009. And so things were sort of breaking badly in summer of 2009. And on about October, November of 2009, magically, everything just seemed to come together. And the technology started to work magically. So
what happened? Why?
So this is really an exercise in machine learning. It's what the team at Nuance also did. You're basically looking at speech recognition, you're looking at phonemes, you're looking at syllables, you're looking at words, you're looking at endpoints, you're looking at phrases, you're trying to understand each of those expressions and trying to disambiguate, where does the word start, where does the word end, what do the syllables mean, which word are you referring to, which homonym are you, fits into a context, how do you get speech recognition right? Natural language is a whole level on top of that. It's the same set of issues. It's like, giants in New York or giants in San Francisco. What does it mean? And so Siri brought together disparate pieces of AI that had existed in separate silos but never been brought together before in a single product. And that's what was magical about it. So it brought together speech recognition, natural language understanding, dialogue management, domain knowledge, and agentic AI, so that you could interface to services, web services out on the web. Initially 45 services, planned for 4,500 services, or maybe 45,000 eventual services, to basically be your interface to all the services on the web, was to build one single natural language understanding AI that was designed as a personal assistant to help you access all of those services on the internet. That was a very compelling vision because it's very enabling and it basically made computers more like human beings, so that you're really speaking to something that's your virtual personal assistant, was our terminology and idea. I think Dag came up with that, of course. So that was bringing those pieces together had not been done before, was a very hard problem, and again, disambiguating the meaning of what was said from literally the syllable level to the intention level to the domain understanding to the action to be taken. All of that was new. And every piece of that had to be solved, and every piece of that had to work right. And by the way, if you couldn't answer the question, the team came up with this idea of graceful degradation. And so if you couldn't answer it, at least you could fail not badly. You didn't want to do a faceplant. You didn't want to embarrass yourself. You didn't want to fail visibly. You wanted to do the best you could to answer the question or answer the request. And you also you didn't want to lose confidence, and you didn't want to break confidence, and you never wanted to lose the trust of the user. You also wanted to engage the user and make it a fun, personable experience, and that's a whole story by itself. I think they spoke of Harry Sadler, who was the voice of Siri, the personality of Siri, the gag man comedian for Siri, with a dry, sort of sarcastic sense of humor that created a personality that people just loved right out of the box, weren't expecting. It's what Norman Winarski called surprise and delight. And so.
But in that, I mean, all those pieces are hard to integrate. And
yes.
I know that systems integration has been a theme of other parts of your career, I believe.
Yes.
But I mean, was it just sort of a whole bunch of small things coming together in the summer of 2009, or was there some particular, or maybe is that more of a question for Adam?
No, it's a great question. Here's my take. It is a question for Adam. He can better answer it than I or anyone.
You have the deep technical knowledge and you were involved.
So here's my take. Essentially, one way to think of machine learning is that you're creating a set of predictions, and you're predicting, for example, with speech recognition, what's the phoneme, what's the syllable, what's the word. And so what Nuance did was, okay, we're predicting phonemes. Now we're predicting what phonemes fit into what syllables. Now we'll map this against the syllables to say, okay, we have this, what we think is a phoneme. We're going to map it against the syllables, and then we're going to map the syllables against a word. What are the matches? Well, that's what Siri did. They did it with speech recognition. They did it with natural language understanding. They did it with domain knowledge and intent. They did it with action. And now they're cross-correlating. So this is my argument to you, Marc, is that this presages what Google did with transformers and did with the attention mechanism of transformers. So we at Siri at that time did not use, we lacked the advantage of neural networks. ultimately.
Yeah, it was statistical machine learning mixed with some rules-based.
Yes. So what we had was statistical machine learning with rules. But using statistical machine learning, we broke the problem into those pieces. We made those predictions, and then we cross-correlated the predictions much as the attention mechanism cross-correlates the attributes in a given set of vectors in your multidimensional vector space that represents the neural network. So the attention mechanism does the same thing that Adam and his team were doing by doing predictions of individual pieces, and those predictions, they would then correlate the predictions to say which of these makes sense. So we're going to take the top prediction here, but we'll take the third prediction down here, because if you map that over here to to this next list, and you're taking a list of like 10 predictions, okay, it doesn't make sense if the top ones together don't make sense, but if you number 3 and number 5 and number 7, now suddenly what you put together makes sense as an intention, and it was all about mapping what is the user's intention. So the goal was to understand the intention, so you could map it into a domain where we knew something, and we knew how to execute a request, and with that execution, we answered the user's request. Does that make sense to you?
I mean,
sort of.
What I'm getting at is it's sort of a critical mass. There's enough triangulation or cross connections at some point that reaches some noticeable point where it gets close enough that we perceive it as being, that is what the intention is.
So Adam can answer this
that
better.
It's more about critical mass than there wasn't some single breakthrough. There was not some. It's more getting these pieces to work better and better.
Yes, but it was algorithmic. It was algorithmic understanding what the correlations were and mapping that to intentions in a domain and mapping it in a way that the predictive value of the intention is high. So Dag would say, and I think the right way to think about this is when you can map users' intention as well as a human being can, and humans get it right 19 times out of 20. And we forgive mistakes from humans. We're much less forgiving of mistakes from computers. But if you can do as well as a human, you're probably, it's probably good enough because there's reduced friction.
That's the critical mass.
That's the critical mass. So if you get it 95% right, if you get understanding the request and mapping it to the domain 95% right, then you have a product. But that's not enough. You have to have graceful degradation so you can't be making mistakes and falling flat on your face. And you can't make mistakes that compromise the user in any way in terms of giving them the wrong solution, taking an action they didn't want.
100 pizzas arrive at their house.
Yeah, all of those things.
Okay, so that summer of 2009, it starts to feel like it's coming together.
Yeah.
So just tell the story.
Fall of 2009. Summer of 2009.
Oh, that was the low point.
Yeah, summer 2009, I'm thinking this is going to be a hard financing because nobody believes that this is a solvable problem. The problem we've tried to solve is not one thing, it's all of those things. Speech recognition, natural language understanding, dialogue management, domain knowledge,
hundreds of web
all
services
those things, all those
connected.
Things. We're trying to solve them all at once. And nobody thinks that any of them, except for speech, which is a solved problem now, but all the rest are unsolved problems and not solvable. So literally, nobody thought those problems could be solved, which is why it was so surprising that in 2010, when we launched, nobody expected this. Nobody saw it coming.
But fall of 2009, internally, you could see that this is suddenly working. So how did that change your strategy?
So, Marc, I was personally giddy when I saw it working. I was like, oh my God, they actually got this to work. This is going to be huge. Because it was clear that this is a universal something that anybody would want. And then I took an early prototype and I went out to demo it to my friends.
Prototype in what form?
Just a software prototype of the original Siri.
But I mean, on a laptop, on a
Oh,
phone.
on phone.
It was already
on the
okay.
smartphone. It was already on it was iPhone 3, I think. iPhone 3 at that point. The 4 was, or 4, but not the 4S. I think the 4, but not the 4S.
Yeah, and they, prior to that though, like when it wasn't working that well, this was already on a phone to look at, or this was going into their offices?
We would go in
and
their
looking at a
office and
PC?
look at it. They didn't really, I wasn't really interested in watching it fail. When they had a working demo, okay, fine, I will use it, but if it's going to fail on me, I don't want to get disheartened by this. Like, go back to the lab and work
Rubbing
on
it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when it worked, though, do you remember it? Was that at a board meeting, or how? What was the revelation that this is actually doing something?
So they passed a phone around, and we started asking questions, and it started getting the answers correct. And that was very exciting. And then we invited users in for user testing, and they did very serious focus group user testing to see user behavior, model user behavior, and really understand user acceptance, what questions they were going to ask, what were the most common questions, and what are the off things that people are cheeky and want to challenge a chatbot and want to say off-color things and so forth. So you have to handle all those cases, and the Siri team did. But I remember going out to a restaurant and showing my friends, and it was a noisier restaurant, and the speech recognition failed totally because all the background noise, the team had not considered how it is that you wall out, near field, far field communications such that you could actually disambiguate the ambient noise from the. So there were lots.
And Nuance had not solved that independently.
Had not solved it independently.
Okay.
It was a while before that was solved. They had to solve that before, during, up to, and through launch. But I was like, oh, it's another failure mode. There's just so many failure modes. I can't tell you how many ways to fail there. There's only one way to succeed, and there are a million ways to fail. So it was a white knuckle ride. And it was at the same time, it was joyful because this team is so smart, so good at solving problems, so much fun to work with, so collaborative. And it was, at the board level, it was 6 people, the 3 entrepreneurs.
Who else was on the board?
So Sean Carolyn of Menlo Ventures and Norman Winarski were the other 2 directors. We had Tom First, who was a financial advisor, and Scott Karchmer, who is our legal counsel. That was the board. So, and Tom Gruber, of course, Adam Cheyer, and Dag Kittlaus. So 24 meetings from raw startup to launch. I was the only one who had CEO experience, and so the rest of the team was doing this the first time, and so I was able to guide them through company building process, all that was necessary, set up everything from leases to incorporations and legal documents and financing documents and then thinking through the marketing plans, thinking through the go-to-market plans, the PR strategy, all of that. So, but they're such fast learners that all of those things, that was one meeting, on to the next, right? So it was just great.
And so once it started working well in the fall of 2009, so the next round of financing, I mean, how did that come about then? Because you still needed to get more, or did?
Okay, that's a great question. So remember, there were 3 waves of failed AI. And even though speech recognition now worked, and people agreed that now worked, well, of course, natural language understanding, dialogue management, virtual assistant, what's that? And how can this possibly run on a phone? Just recently you had a flip phone, right? And now you're talking about you're going to run all this AI on a phone. Are you kidding me? So, these things would require supercomputers, don't they? So that's what we were up against. And we went back, Dag Kittlaus and I went back to Sand Hill Road and all the venture capitalists. And there were no believers. I mean, you asked Dag this, like, people did AI, we don't want to know about it.
Even when you had a demo?
I don't know that they
Or were you showing?
He'd show the demo, but even that they didn't. People believed it was a CAN demo, or I'm not sure what they believed. They just didn't think this was a solvable problem. So there was not a great reception for this. We got one offer, which was a fairly lowball price from a venture capital firm, and that was not very interesting. And we got one other offer from a woman by the name of Selena Chow of Horizon Ventures, who is, that's the venture capital arm of the Li Ka-shing operation out of Hong Kong in those days. And he was a very wealthy real estate person in China. And Selena had invested in Facebook. She is a very intuitive investor, technically savvy, but mostly like, I believe in you. And so she met Dag and Adam and said, sure, I'll write you a check. So she wrote a significant check, like $20 million, 15, 20 million, I've forgotten, a big check. And so now we're about to launch, we're flush with cash, and Dag goes on a press tour. There are a few people in the world that are better at telling a story than Dag Kittlaus, and weaving the magic, painting the vision, getting people excited, getting them engaged. There were, I think, 50 interviews, and I think there are 50 articles. So everybody was interested, like, wow, this team has finally cracked the problem, solved the problem. The product launched, and the first day servers were deluged. We tried to build a scalable server for this, but we were like almost overwhelmed with the incoming traffic. So we were very excited. We thought the launch had gone well. Lots of data that we're getting back from all the user requests, figuring out what do we do next, how do we evolve the product. And then Dag told the story about a call first from Scott Forstall saying, we want to come talk to you guys. And then he got another call and he said, hi, this is Steve. And the way I tell the story, I think Dag may tell a little different. It was like, Steve. Steve who? Steve Jobs. Sure it is, right? Sure it's Steve Jobs. No, this is Steve. So that may be my telling. I'm not sure.
I think that's.
Did they say? Is that what he said?
I have to look back.
Okay, check.
Close.
It's pretty close. It's pretty close. Anyway, so Steve invited Dag to come to his house. Dag got an invitation for his co-founders. They sat and talked for 3 hours. That began a 45-day courtship period during which Steve Jobs personally called Dag 30 times. I think we logged the calls. And we logged what was said in the calls, and we tried to track it. Began the first of, I think, 5 offers to buy the company. The first was, we thought, a ridiculously low price, and we said, thank you, we're just, we're not looking to be sold right now. The price went up, and Steve persisted, continued on 30 calls, if you can imagine, personally from the CEO. So at this point, Marc, I've been on 40 boards of directors. I've seen a lot of company offers. I've never seen a CEO as persistent as Steve Jobs in wanting to buy this company. It's quite remarkable. So by the end of it, I was quite convinced that whatever the price was, Steve would pay it, because this was his vision. He had tried to build something called Casper in the 1990s, which was speech recognition technology. Didn't work. It failed utterly at Apple. Apple spent a lot of money on it. It didn't work. And Steve saw this technology, met the team, believed that saw that it worked, and said, look what we could do together as a team. If you come into Apple, I can take this out to the world. So by the end of it, the board sort of had a number in mind to say, okay, well, we're not interested in selling, but if there is a deal to be made, it's not below this price. And I'm not allowed to say, but contractually, even to this day, you honor your contracts. But Steve was nearing that price, but hadn't gotten to it. And at some point, the team is saying, well, you have your price, but you guys are wealthy. This is our first time as entrepreneurs. This has changed your life money for all of us. We need to think about this. How do we solve this problem? And so we had a long midnight meeting. You can ask Dag and Adam about it. I suggested a way to bridge the gap, let's just say. And if you understand finance and you understand balance sheet and capitalization tables, there's always a way to solve a problem. So I suggested something to Dag, and Dag said that I can sell that. So Dag went in with his list of here are the conditions. Steve, I'm here to say, if you meet these conditions, Siri is yours.
So that was your suggestion.
And so we got to condition number 5 of 10, and Dag's going quickly through the list, and he's glossing over it. Steve says, wait, go back to number 5. And Dag repeats it, and he says, that's bullshit. That's VC bullshit. And Dag says, that's exactly what it is. But if you agree to this, Siri is yours. So, and Steve said, you can talk to Dag about this, but Steve said, long pause. He said, all right, but you guys better work your asses off. When you get here, you better work your asses off. So Steve got what he wanted, headline number. We got what we want, the ultimate market cap value. And everybody was happy. The team wanted to sell not just because of the money, but because of the mission. They saw Apple as the vehicle that could take this technology. Their mission was to take this, democratize it, take it to the world. And Norman Winarski and I, Sean Carolyn, spent better part of a day talking with them and say, look, you have a much bigger economic opportunity if you stay independent. Here's the path. Here's how it would work. Here's what the economics are to you. This will be it's clear there's a big outcome here. You don't need to sell. You have the capital. Apple will still be interested. Nothing like this exists anywhere else. It will be years before anybody else solves this problem. It proved to be better part of a decade before anybody else began to solve the problem. Even to this day, it's not a well-solved problem. So there's an independent path, and that's a high value. And the team said, look, Apple can take this globally. It can take it sooner. It can take it with certainty. And we believe that we found the right partner to make this happen. It's our mission. It's what we want to do. So, they're entrepreneurs. They're not indentured servants. And you, at some point, have to say, okay, so we're here to support your vision, to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve. It's a good outcome financially. Let's go.
But you would have been as happy or happier had they gone the independent route. Great question.
At the
time.
Mark, at the time, I would have been happier because I felt there was a better financial upside for them and for all the investors, but for them in particular, there's a better financial upside by staying independent. In the fullness of time, I think the decision to sell to Apple transformed the world. It literally moved the world forward in a way that's, it's 10, 15 years in the future, where, let me just describe how advanced it was. On Siri in 2010, you could ask Siri to book a table with OpenTable, it would book a table. You still can't do that with any other AI. You could ask for a taxi to come pick you up or an Uber, still can't do that. You could buy a book on Amazon, still can't do that. You could book a ticket for a movie theater, still can't do that. So Siri had agentic AI figured out in 2010. It's 2025 now. And the biggest thing for OpenAI, they're about to announce agentic AI. 15 years later. 15.
And Salesforce and everyone else.
15, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, when I talked to him for the chatbots exhibit about, we probably talked 6 months ago or something. He was talking about the word do engine.
Yes.
And you remember that from the time. And he was saying that's what's really missing still, is that.
Yes.
But I mean, do you remember that terminology and that vision?
Of course. So and this is pure Dag Kittlaus, because, you know, great marketing condenses an idea into something that's simple, accessible, and compelling. And search engines were on everybody's mind. Google was hugely successful. It was ubiquitous. Google had become a verb. And search engine was, well, that's all we need. Internet provides search engines. But wait, now there are 4,500 services on the internet, all of which have an API programmable interface, and you can access any of those services. And you could do so with speech recognition, natural language understanding, intent understanding, knowledge management, domain management, and you can get a transaction done. One last comment. So for Siri to have been successful, they have to solve not just the technological problems and the marketing problems, getting the awareness, the brand, et cetera, but they have to solve the business model problems. The question is, how do you get paid? And if this is a free service to the user, and we were intent that this was not a subscription service, it had to be a free service, then you either pester them with advertising, or you get a marketing affiliate fee by referring a transaction. So our strategy was, all the interactions will be free. They cost us money, just like searches cost Google money, except Google now presents ads, and so they offset. And but we were going to offset with not pestering you with ads, but with marketing affiliate fees. So all of those web services, if you take traffic to them directly, you get paid directly, and you get paid 10x, 100x what you get paid for presenting an advertisement.
Sure, because it's not just a click through, it's actually a finished transaction.
Correct. It's
totally
25, and this still doesn't work for anybody else. It was working in 2010 for Siri. Apple, by the way, did not do this. They did not carry that forward as part of the product.
Because my next question really is about, before Apple, tell me more, and they certainly talked about it in the panel, but what was the vision? Business model is a key part of it, as you're saying. Who were they going to sell it to? How were they going to make money? You talked about the 4,500 services, which I recall.
Right.
And it was, they had even though you were demoing it on the iPhone, there was no reason it had to be Apple only, right?
Correct.
They were planning. Tell me what it would have looked like had they continued independently.
So, great question. At the time, you have to sort of roll back to what was the world like in 2010. The world in 2010 was, there was one iPhone, and everything else was a carrier phone, which had a 3.5-inch screen, maybe, not even, some 2.5 in some cases, had a number of apps on a home screen. And if you were on the home screen, you had a chance of people might push the button and invoke your app, and you had a little text bar and so forth. So it was very rudimentary, and there was the iPhone, which was showing the way to a much better user interface with multi-touch and so forth. But getting on the home screen for the carriers, it was a big deal because carriers sold a lot of phones globally. Dag negotiated with Verizon, with a VP of marketing, John Stratton at Verizon, negotiated a $20 million contract. I think we signed the contract. So we had like a $20 million budget to do a launch on Verizon on the home screen. Look, Verizon's got speech recognition. It has natural language understanding. We can do transactions on Verizon. Isn't this great?
On what? Only on iPhone or on other phones?
Across its line, because we were porting to a whole bunch of 24 people, if you can imagine doing all of this and porting to all of these phones. And we're going to port Verizon.
Symbian and
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly.
Palm. Palm was already in trouble.
I don't think Palm.
Yeah, WebOS.
I forgot. Yeah, but Symbian was for sure one of the operating systems that the team had to port to.
Nothing with iMode in Japan. That was.
I don't recall iMode. There were discussions of iMode.
BlackBerry.
I don't know if that had been productized.
With Docomo.
But this was an available. It was going to be available product. It was going to be announced and launched with a big ad campaign from Verizon. And while Steve Jobs was calling 30 times, this deal was being negotiated and consummated. And eventually, I mean, the board said, look, we need to just go forward. We don't know where the deal with Steve is going to work. We have Verizon as a customer, as a marketing channel. We have to do this deal. And, Apple will have to live with that if they choose to acquire us, they have to live with that, but it's value add. It's a Verizon relationship. They have a relationship with Verizon. Let them figure it out. So Dag comes in and he basically says, well, we're negotiating this deal. It puts timing pressure on Steve to get the deal done. Very clever. And eventually comes back and says, okay, well, the deal's done, Steve, and Steve says, don't worry about it. I can fix it. So he basically magically calls John Stratton and says, I don't know what he said, but sort of Verizon, Siri is now an exclusive iPhone immediately upon acquisition. Is no longer available. I don't care what they signed. This is no longer available on Symbian or anything else. Any of your other phones, not there. But we'll sell it to you on iPhone. We'll cut some special deal with you. But anyway, so Steve solved the problem. Yeah.
But originally, so this was going to be on multiple phones. Verizon would have been the first carrier, but presumably others, right?
Negotiating.
It wasn't an exclusive.
It was going to be, everything's going to be exclusive for a time. You only signed exclusive deals for a time limit. I think it was 6 months or something like that before we could go out. And the engineering team, it was a small engineering team. So, we were going to be busy making them happy for at least 6 months. We didn't lose anything by selling 6 months of exclusivity. They thought they got something. Realistically, we couldn't have done anything else anyway.
And Verizon is mostly U.S., so it would have been, that was exclusive for here, not for other markets, or you weren't thinking beyond at that point?
Verizon, mostly U.S. I don't know how big a footprint, if any, they had outside. Yeah, at that time.
Was the thought to go really start in the U.S. or to go global immediately?
The thought absolutely was to go global, but to start in the U.S. And to be honest, we thought that was 2-3 years easily to develop the U.S. marketplace before we would think of taking it outside. But there wasn't real competition in Europe, really quiescent in terms of entrepreneurship, and China hadn't risen at that point as a factor. So.
And the business model, so the $20 million would have been for the exclusivity, but the Verizon would have paid for each instance of Siri on a phone?
Correct.
And then the service providers would have paid when a completed transaction came through.
Yes.
And they would have paid you or Verizon?
Yes. So I think there was a revenue split. And I think Verizon got, recouped some of its investment over time with the revenue split.
But who would do the billing? Verizon, presumably, right?
Verizon, I think, would do the billing, yeah.
So, I mean, to the consumer...
And there was a big negotiation of who'd get what split, and Dag came out the winner in that negotiation. I'll let him tell you that story.
But so let's say someone orders something from a restaurant through their Verizon phone.
Yes.
The restaurant would pay something to Verizon or Siri for that
again,
sale.
the billing was through Verizon, so we would be receiving.
And then they would split.
We would be receiving revenues through, and Verizon had its own accounting for this. That's my recollection.
Okay, which would have really changed their relationship as a phone company to become. I mean, they would have been.
It's a whole new revenue.
It was an e-commerce platform.
Precisely. It's a whole new revenue stream for them, and this is what Dag sold them. He said, look, we are your gateway to 4,500 web services. Here's a new revenue stream for carriers in general, for Verizon in particular, and we will split the revenues with you on a negotiated basis.
Oh, I mean,
and there was a deal. There was their standard deal for everybody else. Siri got a special deal because Dag negotiated a special deal.
Because, I mean, both in the past, like Minitel in France, France Telecom had a similar, the kiosk thing where they would bill.
Right.
And then NTT Docomo with iMode also got a split from the services. So this would have created a model almost like that, but not for information, for actual services. So
yes, exactly. So not for information, but for actual services. And essentially, those services, I mean, the user was paying the services. This is an important point, Marc, and let me expound upon this for 1 second. The Siri team, and with Dag in lead, developed, I thought, a brilliant business model, which to this day is not well understood. And the model simply is the model of personalization. So this service, the Siri, needs to be personalized to you, but it will only be personalized to you when it can provide a service that you want. So if you want, information about I'm requesting a car to come to my home, well, can you provide your address? We're not going to ask your address just to begin with. Why would we? But if you want a car to come, and we'll ask, shall we log this so you don't have to enter it next time? Now we have your address. Do you want a notice on something? Now we have your email. Would you like us to buy a service on your behalf? Would you like us, enter your credit card information. Would you like us to log this so you don't have to enter it again? So we would only ask for something when you actually wanted us to provide a service, and we were very intent on building a high trust environment so that users would feel like I'm not being taken advantage of. My information is not being sold. I am not being marketed as a person, but all my transactions are being streamlined because it makes my life easier as a user, and I trust this service. That was our goal.
But it would also, the user, of course, would not pay direct. It'd be like when they go through, I don't know, Uber Eats or something.
Right.
It would be built into the cost. But the service provider would pay Siri.
So no, the user, if you bought a movie ticket, the service
would pay Siri. Right.
Right. So, the user would pay with a credit card to buy the ticket. If you bought a book on Amazon, the user would pay with the credit card information, to buy the book. If you book a table at a restaurant, the restaurant's the one doing the marketing, so you're getting an marketing affiliate fee coming back. So the business model was very important, and to this day, I don't see anybody really doing that.
But also, that would have given potentially, already contextual advertising was fairly mature by then, or getting going in a serious way. So, was there also a side to it for contextual advertising? Because you would have had the right kind of data.
Eventually, Marc, that's a great lure. We just saw this as a signal to noise issue, and we saw advertising as noise. Unless advertising is so good that it becomes content, that you really want that ad to present something that you wanted, it's providing you information that you wanted. Otherwise, we tried to say this needs to be, you have a smallish screen, you can't present sidebar ads like Google does with Overture. You have to constrain what you present so that you're not cluttering the screen or the user interface or the user experience. We're very intent on the user experience.
And not, because the data would have been useful to sell to other advertisers, just standard kind of.
Of course it would.
And that was...
and that was anathema to the team.
Okay, so that was not, you wanted to make money directly on the percentage of the sale.
We wanted to serve our users, not sell our users.
And it's a higher profit margin anyway, right?
Much.
You get per impression, or
yes.
It's you said what, a 50-time ratio or something?
Or 100, yeah. It's a huge differential in terms of what you get paid to present an advertisement to actually do a transaction at the end. And we could go all the way, with the user's credit card ultimately to do the transaction in a frictionless way via the API, over the web, do e-commerce, And that was the marketing intention. To be clear, Apple has not followed up on that. It's kind of a mystery to me they haven't. I mean, they could. In the era of agentic AI, we'll see whether OpenAI, Google, and others now have agents which can perform transactions and can go through this personalization process that Siri had mapped out in 2009, 2010. I mean, it's so far ahead of what has happened in the world. It's quite a compelling story, in my opinion.
And had Siri started to, what was the relationship, if any, directly with the 4,500 providers? I mean, obviously you didn't have it already with all of them, but I mean, you said a tenth of that or something?
45 services at launch.
Or 100.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So again, the Siri team was so clever in terms of both vision and engineering. The engineering, basically, team said, if we have to interface to 4,500 services eventually or more, we better build a way to automate this. We better build a way to create an abstraction layer where we can have high-level concepts mapped to low-level implementation across different APIs. And so we'll build this abstraction layer to allow us to interface the information that we have about our user to the service that they want in a target domain. So Siri built a way of creating domain knowledge with service providers, so domain knowledge about here are the words that have meaning in the domain, here are the intentions that they map to, and here are the service providers that provide, that serve those intentions, and here is an abstraction layer to interface between the intentions and the service in a way that we can automate this. The goal was initially to introduce 3 new domains per quarter. Very ambitious goal. What's a domain? Travel would be a domain. Lodging, hotels would be a domain. Air travel is a separate domain. E-commerce is a domain. Entertainment's a domain. Transportation's a domain.
Everything you've described is e-commerce, though.
All of them are e-commerce, but all of them have separate terminology. All of them have separate words.
So when you say e-commerce is a domain, what do you mean?
I'm really thinking about, there I was thinking about purchases, really, product purchases. So books on Amazon, et cetera. eBay, Amazon, all of those things. Yeah, exactly.
So sorry.
And so there was a service called Programmable Web that published the APIs for everybody who was publishing an API, and you just had to go to Programmable Web to look at what APIs were available and pick amongst the best service providers, because there's multiple providers in a given domain. And by the way, if you're going to serve a domain, you can't just have one provider in that domain. You've got to let a user choose their favorite provider, right? And so you're presenting a choice of providers, maybe prioritizing. Maybe there's a little bit of inducement from the provider to prioritize. You got to serve the user first, not the provider. But so all of that was in progress, but the goal was to build out these domains and to be very good at launch, to be very good at them so that it's a compelling new service. Dag used to talk about, we're sending Siri to college now. She's learned all these new domains. He, it. But we tried to, and we'll come to the personality if you want. That's so much fun. But so learned a new domain, and now Siri's good at travel, lodging, restaurants, transportation, etc. And that would be our, instead of advertising, we would go out each quarter, 4 times a year, and we'd have a road show. We'd have a road show 4 times a year to say Siri went to college and now Siri learned all these new skills. Isn't this great? Isn't this better for you? And so this was like, it's a rolling thunder campaign where you would introduce new services every quarter. And so it would keep the excitement going. It was like, oh my gosh, this is just moving so fast. Look how exciting this is. OpenAI and others are doing that with AI products at this point. So it's got the whole world wrapped in attention. That would have been Siri had Apple not acquired it. And by the way, the Apple acquisition and what's happened afterward is its own kind of story, which is a great story for internationalization and globalization, and less great story about product advancement. And everybody is a little disappointed that Siri has not moved faster, myself included.
Yeah, and certainly the panel 10 years ago, that was the feeling. And I know that, well, I will ask you about some of that. But that sounds brilliant that it would have been like suddenly real estate's the new topic, or sports, or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
Entertainment.
Sports, perfect domain, yeah.
Endless.
Yeah, exactly. Events, concerts, music, entertainment, etc. So, yeah, Eventbrite, all of these things were domains, and we had a target list of the domains and a prioritization as to which ones can we do well and serve easily, and what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the ones that we can monetize? What are the ones that users will most care about? Well, where will we get the most additional users and the greatest traffic? So it was for 24 people. I mean, you got to step back, Marc, and look at this and say, wait, what? 20? So this, I think, again, I said earlier, there are times in the history of the computer industry where magic happened and lightning got caught in a bottle. And, the Dartmouth Conference in 1956, the AI labs in the early 1970s, Xerox PARC in the mid-70s, early 80s, Apple Macintosh, and I think Siri is one of those. Today AI is, and large language models, deep neural nets, and AI is lightning in a bottle, changing everything. And by the way, the internet in the late 1990s, another.
Yeah, I mean the web, I think.
The web.
The web counts.
Yeah, the web counts for sure. But I'm biased, but I think Siri is one of those events, and it's not just lightning in a bottle, but it's 15 years ahead of the rest of the world in so many ways. And agentic and personalized agentic virtual personal assistant, domain understanding, intent understanding, to do that well. Others, you can argue that others have caught up. Google Assistant, Adam and Dag went out and built the technology at Viv Laboratories, sold to Samsung, languishing now as Bixby. So others have equaled the 2010 vision, the 2010 product, but not the 2010 vision.
And that whole business model, that whole ecosystem no one's really tried to, no one's been in a position to try to do that all at once.
The agentic services, I've not seen others pursue that model, let alone execute it well.
But so you had identified 4,500 with an API.
At the time.
Right. But presumably, I mean, once there was a reason to, lots of other services could have added the appropriate API. They would have been clamoring to be included.
Exactly.
But for the, let's say, I mean, you'd already made arrangements with 45. How about would another one that didn't know about Siri? Mm-hmm. If Siri pointed the user to a service that was, so how would that work?
Yes, okay, so another great question. So in the early days, the team had a technology and a platform to go from domain understanding to intent recognition to transaction formulation to interface to the programmable service. That was And there was a specialized team within Siri that did those, and it was only a handful of people. We didn't have that many people. So it was only a handful of people building out these domains, understanding the language of the domain all the way to the transaction execution. Our goal was to make this a developer tool so that you hand it to a developer and say, here's how to customize your domain and extend Siri to work in your domain. And just like the Apple has the software development kit, SDK, and for their to build products for their app store, we essentially would have provided a development tool for. You're taxing my memory here, Marc, because this is like 15 years ago. This is like 15 years ago. It's like, yeah.
No, whatever you remember.
Oh no! But we were building a developer with the intent to productize this developer tool, not to sell it, but to make it available to developers so that they could extend Siri for their domain and then perform transactions in their domain, even without our resources to do those extensions.
Because they could do it much more rapidly and with more subject.
There are so many more of them.
Obvious.
I mean, it was 24 people, right? So.
But could Siri point to a site that you guys weren't aware of?
Could they point?
I mean, let's say that Siri was hooked up to standard search at some level as well, right? So I mean, if it finds a restaurant in a particular place, how would the business model work there? Like someone wants to order Indian food, obviously
by a search?
Each Indian.
By a search?
Well, that's I guess what I'm asking.
Okay, so let me address the search question because I think it's really, really important. We talked about graceful degradation earlier. If Siri can't answer your question, solve your request, what happens? And you want the user to still have a good experience regardless of whether you can perform the transaction or the work that the user wants. One of the days I was most excited was when, and I should have seen this, I didn't. The team came back, I don't know whose idea it was. Team came back and said, well, if we can't solve the problem, we'll just drop the user through to Google.
Yeah, right.
And I said, wait, what you're telling me is Siri's worst case is Google's best case. Let me get this right. It's like, not only do we get you to the place you wanted in Google, but we added speech recognition, voice understanding, and we got you to Google. You didn't have to type anything on your phone. Thumb type. It's like, so wait, we added speech recognition to Google for free, and that's the worst we can do for the user.
Failure mode.
That's our failure mode. That's our failure. I said, hot damn, we have a business here.
That's true. There's a huge value add.
Yeah.
But suppose you want food from the Indian restaurant. You say, local Indian restaurants. It can search, it can find where local ones are. Would it just drop you at Google there? Or what I'm getting at, what's the business model if you say, I want to order from a local Indian restaurant? So they're not going to have an API on their own little website.
Right.
So would there be like a Yelp in between, or how would the monetization work if that was worked out?
Well, in 2010, not everything was worked out. Let's just be honest. Okay. So we could only deal with the APIs that existed, and you can't build an API for an Indian restaurant. We weren't going to. One-off Indian restaurants. There are a lot of them. So that was not on our radar. What we could do was, if you said, what's a good Indian restaurant, we could go to Yelp and we could present you a list and we did, of best Indian restaurants. And we tried to prioritize the different services which were the best services at giving information to the users. And we didn't just rely on Google to do Google search. If there was a better service provider to provide a given class of information, Eventbrite, Yelp, others, as to how can I answer your request. There were also, you may recall also, that people would ask, how many moons does Saturn have, right? And you could drop through to Google, but you say, wait, True Knowledge there's a knowledge website called True Knowledge can answer that question. Will from Alpha can answer that question. And they have APIs. So we'll just ping the API, say, can you answer this question? If we can, then we'll just say, here's the answer to your question, and underbar with notice from Will from Alpha or from True Knowledge. So we're advertising for them on the one hand. They were happy. They get an impression. They serve an answer. They have an API. Everybody's happy. We're not pretending that we provided that knowledge. We're crediting them. So these were all, it's hard to believe. If you look back at what we've talked about, it's hard to believe that 24 people did this in 24 months, right? It's just 28 months, I think, in total. It's pretty prodigious, yeah.
But the path forward, I think, was something like, so Yelp, you would have the relationship, let's say, with Yelp,
yes.
And over time, the hope would be that Yelp might come up with their own model with each restaurant, so that a Siri search would go, a request to Siri would go to Yelp. Yelp would pay Siri, ultimately, when it had some arrangement with each restaurant, something like that. But
So
it would be a cascading model.
Yeah, so I guess an intermediary service provider is your question, as to somebody who's aggregating services from small companies. And that didn't exist at the time, to my knowledge. You can imagine such a service. Well, wait a second.
Hotels.com,
DoorDash is that now, right?
But at the time, like, it already existed for travel, let's
Right.
say, right? Like hotels.com.
Yes, right, exactly.
So maybe with a hotels.com, you would order the room, and then hotels.com would handle the business relationship with
exactly. So that's an astute question. For the small business owners who don't have the resources, there are aggregators who will provide the intermediary service of transaction management and perform the transaction for them and order the service and so forth. So as I said, DoorDash does that now. Hotels.com, you mentioned, others have that intermediary model. That was, TBD in the future for us.
No, I guess what I'm getting at, maybe it's easy to look back, but I mean, it seems, had the Siri model taken off, the hope would have been that would have been an incentive for these intermediaries to firm up relations with each of the smaller businesses, so that it would be a sort of market pressure to bring e-commerce down to the last mile, to the smaller. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be a fundamentally different business model.
It'd be I think the world would be different had Siri stayed independent. It would have been a longer, slower climb, but there would be the rolling thunder of new services every quarter, so excitement building around that. But becoming a global brand and becoming a cultural phenomenon, having Jay Leno talk about you on the Jay Leno show, being the subject of Big Bang Theory, an entire episode where Raj falls in love with Siri. I don't know if you saw that. Did you see that episode?
I've heard of that.
It's hysterical. It's just hysterical. The whole thing is really a brilliant episode. We, as a team, we watched this and said, how did this happen from raw startup, at that point 3 years ago, to a cultural phenomenon that, Jay Leno does entire monologues about, Robin Williams does entire shticks about, and Big Bang Theory. I mean, everybody was talking about it, comedians and so forth. So it was, and quick digression. We were not that long ago in the jungles of Yucatan, in an animal rescue shelter. Long story, but we were there with a random group of tourists from all around the world and local Mexicans and so forth. And our guide said, she said, well, everybody, my name is easy to pronounce. Everybody knows me. I'm Siri. And everybody from all around the world is like, oh, Siri, of course. So how do you build a global brand for 7 billion people and have them know the name and the brand promise? That's an astonishing accomplishment. That's Apple. That's really, I think Steve Jobs and Apple get full marks for that. So from this raw startup, the very beginnings long ago, to this global brand where everybody on the planet, 2 billion people have used Siri one way or another directly, and all 7 billion plus people know about Siri, that's really quite an achievement.
And and I think Dag talked about how the name, initially I guess Apple didn't like the name, but came around, and that.
Dag is a master salesman. Part of the art of sales is knowing not when to speak. Just be quiet and listen, and let the energies in the room play out. So there are a lot of people with different ideas as to what the name should be. Apple, of course, wanted to put its own brand on things. And Dag, instead of pushing for this, which obviously he was happy with, just sort of stayed quiet and let people advance their ideas, and other people would then shoot them down. And Steve Jobs came in and said, I have the name. You recall, he said, it's going to be Apple Talk. Yeah. And everyone, oh God, no, not Apple Talk. That's a horrible name. So then, long conversation ensued where people tried to talk Steve out of Apple Talk. Finally, they persuaded him. And at the end, apparently, everybody was exhausted with the name. Steve didn't like, Genie was another name. Steve didn't like that for whatever reason. And finally said, well, Siri's a perfectly good name. Let's go with Siri. Or a Dag, I think, in the back of the room suggested, well, everybody's always liked Siri. So you might want to consider just keeping the name. And Steve said, that's right. Siri's a perfectly good name. Let's go with Siri. So it was ultimately Steve's choice. Dag in the back of the room, just quietly, patiently waiting for the moment when everybody had exhausted themselves with all their bad ideas. And then finally this name, endures. I remember, Marc, literally jumping out of my chair at the announcement. They said, and we have this new product, it's natural language understanding. It's a great new product. And it's called Siri. I mean, oh my God, they kept the name.
Oh, you hadn't realized until, oh wow.
No. I mean, this is now part of Apple.
Sure, yeah,
everything's,
yeah.
The investors, we're out of the picture now. I literally jumped out of the chair and I said, this is amazing, because the Siri team and, Dag, Adam, and Tom will for the rest of their lives get credit for this, for what they did, for their vision, for their execution, for their innovation, because the name has been preserved, and that Apple will market under this name. And Apple doesn't, Google builds products and then drops them. Apple doesn't. Apple stays and builds and it polishes and iterates. It chooses products very carefully, but it continues to build. So this is 15 years later, Siri's still global brand, strong as ever, going to be stronger. There are big plans, I think, to bringing large language models and to really improve the Siri experience. Thank God, time. But it's amazing that they kept the brand. That keeps the original vision alive, the team to tell the story, and the story seems more fresh and relevant because it's still in the world, people using it, rather than some distant human thing. This is the backstory for what people use.
It's become it's almost a verb now.
I think success is when it becomes a verb.
And you mentioned the personality, most of that was already formed when Apple bought it, right?
Oh, entirely.
So tell me the story.
Yeah. So the story is told, and probably better told, in the original panel discussion, but I'll give you my quick version of it. Dag's vision, and I think this is really a credit to Dag, and maybe Tom and Adam, I don't mean to dismiss anybody's contribution, was that executives have an executive assistant, a high-powered assistant, that will help you transact, help you get your work done, smooth things out, take care of details for you, just make things happen for you. But this is only very well-paid, exclusive executives have such a person working for him or her. And Dag's vision was, well, we can build this for every human being on the planet. Every human being can have their own executive assistant, and this AI assistant will perform all the same or many of the same functions that you would get: book an airplane flight, book a restaurant table, order a cab, all the things that you might do and delegate to your assistant. This will do for you. So this is the executive assistant for the rest of us. It's for free. It's part of an AI service, and then we'll monetize by the people who are providing the service to you. That's a brilliant strategy, because I can't think of anybody who doesn't want that. Who doesn't want that, right? So that was the vision. But then the question became, well, if this is robotic, it's going to be boring. And so and I think Sean Carolyn basically was very enamored of a chatbot called Smarter Child. So he said, look, there are 17 million users. There are a billion queries that have come into this thing. There are people who really want to interact with a system that behaves like a human being. It really goes back to Eliza, very early days of AI. So the question is, okay, so if you're going to have something that is interactive and has a dialogue and it has interactions with the user, it's going to have a personality. There is no such thing that has no personality. It will be robotic. That's a personality. Or it will be human. And if it's human, what do you want the personality to be like? So Dag's answer, and it was brilliant, was I want it to be professional first and foremost. I want it to be efficient. I want to get your work done, and I want to behave in a professional way and treat you with dignity and respect. But I also want to have a little bit of a sly sense of humor, a little bit of cheekiness, and I want to preserve professional boundaries, which is to say, like, no, that's not an appropriate thing to say to me. So, and I also want it to be funny and a little witty and maybe a little bit sarcastic. If there's sarcasm coming in, you need a little bit of sarcasm coming back. If you have a out of the box question like, will you marry me? Or what's your backstory? Then you need to have anticipated that those are the kinds of questions that users would ask, and to give an entertaining answer. And you may or may not recall, but for months and even years after Siri was first introduced, we buried a whole bunch of Easter eggs of things that if you ask this question, you got a really funny, unexpected answer, and those were planted everywhere. So again, Harry Sadler was the creative writer who the team recruited from Apple, as it happens, to be the creative writer to create the personality. But we said, here are the specifications for the personality. We want a virtual assistant that behaves this way. And Harry created that personality. And what we didn't anticipate was that was going to be as big a draw, as big an attraction as the services, as the ability to get information or to get work done. But to interact with something that had a personality was totally new at that point. So I think the surprise to the team was that this was as big a feature, and it's what created the cultural conversation around this thing has a personality, and it's funny, and it's witty, and it talks back to me. It's very proper until I'm not, and then it gives me a little bit of sass in return, right? So the whole conception and execution was entertaining. It was intended to be entertaining, and it worked even better than anybody expected, I think. And especially Apple. I don't think Apple didn't see this when they didn't really focus on this when they were acquiring it. And they go, oh, what is this? So part of the phenomenon. You can ask Adam about this, but the servers were overloaded. Adam went in, Peter Oppenheimer was a CFO at Apple at the time said, "How many servers do you need?" Well, Adam said, "Well, we've modeled this, but we probably should have twice as many servers as just so we have some buffer in case there's more demand than we expected." Didn't remotely come close. The servers were overloaded. They had put in like 10 times the servers to get the demand after Apple launched the product. The demand was off the charts for this interaction. So it was, and so there was a big rush by the Apple team to get servers installed to meet the demand for this new class of service. It was that engaging, that entertaining, that much a cultural conversation.
And the earlier demos that you had seen, like starting 2000, well, really at the beginning, that demoed it to the board. I mean, it had no personality at that point.
No.
It was just, and there was, I mean, it was doing voice recognition. It was talking back to you, but in what kind of voice?
It was not doing voice recognition.
Oh, okay. That was
the first demo was thumb typing. That's a separate story, but let me just recount it briefly. So, having been on the Nuance board, I try to take very little credit. I think this was my idea, but the team gets the credit for execution. You know, I basically lobbied, let's just say, take no credit. I lobbied, the team gets the credit. I lobbied that we should make speech recognition the principal form of interaction on the platform. When Apple took in the product, they made it the only form of interaction. It's only now that you can even text type to it. Apple made it so this is the only way you can interact with Siri is to interact via speech. So, but my view was it should be a principal mode, not just an available mode. It should be a principal mode. Having been on the Nuance board, I knew the Nuance technology would work. I also knew that Nuance was under new management, under the new leadership, was not easy to negotiate with, and maybe was litigious, and maybe a little bit predatory in pricing, using litigation as a tool to bring people to the table on favorable terms to Nuance. So I said, and I was working with a team called Lingo. We were looking at, they had come to me after we'd sold Nuance and said, invest in us, join our board, it will be a competitor to Nuance, rinse, repeat, recycle your investment in speech recognition. So I talked with them. I liked the team. We ultimately decided not to invest, but I introduced the team to the Siri team, if I recall correctly. And the Siri team said, we need an alternative to Nuance, because we don't want to go in, if they think they have leverage over us, they will extract a very high price, and they'll take all the profit out of our business. And we don't want that, obviously. So Lingo cut an attractive deal, and at the 11th hour, as we went to launch with Verizon, and Nuance is trying to negotiate with Verizon a speech recognition deal, but they don't have any services to provide. We just recognize speech, okay? So we said, well, we have this deal with Verizon, and we can bring you into Verizon, but you have to meet the terms that we just negotiated with Lingo. And that was huge for the economics, the future economics of the Siri team. And so again, this board, this entrepreneur group sort of played it fairly cagily in building the company.
But Siri could work, I mean, there was no voice recognition until that point. I mean, maybe experimentally, but I mean, it was, you had not decided.
No, we had it working, and by the summer, I think the summer of 2009, we had Lingo integration. We had it working early on, and we negotiated, I think, in about November, as things were really working, November, December, and we're maybe January, we're about to launch with Verizon. By that time, we had negotiated the deal with Nuance, approximately.
And
2010.
Dragon was not in this space at that.
Dragon was not a server-based technology particularly. It was a desktop and a packaged product, and a PC-based recognition. It was not really so the server products were Nuance and Lingo were the two principal. Yeah, the others were really desktop and whatnot.
And so when Apple first made the offer, I presume they were saying at least that they would do the more service model with the deals with the 4500. I mean, it's in retrospect, you say that Apple did not continue that model. But were they saying, did they have initial plans to do that? Or?
Okay, so here's another story. And it's a great story. Apple was interested in the technology. I'll be honest, I was a little apprehensive that Apple would come in. You know, Microsoft was famous for this for many years. Microsoft would come in, would bleed you for ideas, drain the team of technical information, go back and try to do it themselves. So I said, look, these are big companies. They have strong engineering teams. Let's not tell them anything that we view as technical trade secret or proprietary information. We'll show them the product. They'll see the product in the market. We'll give them, hands-on. We'll describe in high level, but not low-level detail, the details of the product. So Scott Forstall basically came in and said, well, we'd like, send in some engineers to kind of see, what we can do. And Scott was VP of engineering at Apple. So, and I don't know whether Steve Jobs was not here for this meeting, but the team came in from Apple and they said, okay, well, you can do, we plan to integrate this into Apple products. So we plan to integrate speech recognition, ubiquitous and make it an available means of accessing Apple products and services within Apple, not outside of Apple, just within Apple. So Adam said, okay, well, we can do that. We will create a domain with intentions for Apple Music, Apple iTunes at the time. So over a weekend, from Friday to Monday, there was going to be a demo on Monday. Like, we'd like to see the technology. He said, well, let me see your API. So they come in on Monday, and Adam Cheyer has built an interface personally to Apple iTunes, and it works. The team was the engineering team were not believers beforehand. I was like, who's these guys? We don't need these guys. Like, who are they? Like Steve Jobs is enamored of this. Like, oh gosh. So they send the team in. Over a weekend, they got it up and working with iTunes. The team says, oh, okay. So again, Dag and Adam can tell the story better, but that was a little bit of heroics on Adam Cheyer's part. It's like, okay, let's show Apple what we can do and how this technology works. We've thought through all these problems. And here's an impressive demo.
But did Apple initially say they wanted to make this larger ecosystem, as you talked about?
I'm sure Dag pitched that idea to them. Apple has never pursued that.
Right, but I mean, at the beginning, were they?
So to be honest with you, Apple was never forthcoming in any direct or indirect conversations with me about what their product plans and intentions were, other than to integrate it onto all of Apple's products, which was very clear.
And they did.
Yeah.
The rest of it was after they joined, and then it's behind the veil
Yeah.
of confidentiality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say the following, and part of the reason that, the Siri team went in gung-ho to make this happen. After being acquired, they were given a space and ample protection from Steve Jobs personally to say, you guys, this is your company store. Whatever you need, you just ask for it. I'll make sure you get it, right? Because I want this. This is my project. I want this project. I want you guys to succeed. I want this project to succeed. So they really had a lot of running room for the first year. Then Steve became ill, and there was a new engineering manager assigned in charge of the Siri team, and the entire team, including Dag. And that manager began making odd design decisions and other decisions. That manager was the person associated with Apple Maps, which we may recall was an absolute debacle, and he had just been assigned to be in charge of Siri. So Dag looked at this and said, I'm vested. I've stayed until I'm entirely vested. I'm out of here. And the day that Siri was announced was his last day, or the day after it was announced. That was the day Steve Jobs died, the day after Siri was announced. There's so much that's weird about this. Dag, as you may know, fell ill later fell ill with cancer, pancreatic cancer, the exact same kind that Steve Jobs had. Unlike Steve, he said, I want surgery tomorrow. Got surgery. Turned out his surgeon was the same surgeon Steve Jobs had, world class, and just happenstance. And as Dag will tell the story, he woke up in the operating room the next morning, and the nurse comes into the room, and on her badge reads Siri. That's her name.
Yeah, I think he talked. Oh God. You can't. It would be unbelievable as fiction.
Same cancer, same doctor, nurse's name Siri. You can't make this up, right? How does that happen? So anyway, Dag tells the story. It's his story. It's an amazing story, legendary.
But from your point of view, I mean, once you had sold it, that's not that. I mean, you guys were cashed out at that point. It didn't become Apple stock.
Yes, we sadly we took an all-cash deal. Venture capital needs liquidity returns to pass back to your investors. If it's public stock, we would pass the public stock back to the investors anyway. So we took an all-cash deal. If we'd stayed in Apple stock, that would have been a better idea. I made large investments personally. That's worked out well for me. But the Siri investment turned into cash.
So basically, once the sale happened, I mean, you were out of it was a done deal. And
yeah, and we're wishing the team well.
But did you invest at all in any of the subsequent? I mean, Viv was all Samsung, though, right? That was not.
No. So I was an investor in Viv.
Oh, right. That's what I was. Yeah.
And then Adam formed a new company a couple of years ago called V5, which was previously called Game Planner. Game Planner V5 was sold to Airbnb. Adam is now working as part of Airbnb. So I was a lead seed investor, and I was an investor in Viv and a co-lead investor in V5.
So tell me those subsequent stories. So I mean, after so Adam stayed at Siri with Apple until he left.
Yeah.
Tom stayed much longer.
Yes. And Adam grew frustrated under this engineering director. Adam's very loyal. He's, very solid, reliable engineering executive, but he couldn't take the random decision that he was being asked to make. He couldn't. I can't explain this. There's no logic to these. I can't explain it to my team. And you can ask Adam, but the CFO said, we'll double your stock, we'll double your salary, what do you need? We'll buy you a house in Cupertino, what do you need? And he said, I just need to know one thing, is how are decisions made around here? Because until I understand how decisions are made, I can't manage this process and deliver a product to you. And I can't explain it to my team as to why they're supposed to do anything. I need a better understanding of how decisions are made. And so he left. He and Dag formed, along with Chris Brigham, formed Viv Labs. We were an investor. I was an investor. Later, long story, but
you personally, or
I personally,
Morgenthaler?
Yeah. again, we have a very conservative partnership, and this was a very fancy seed valuation. My partners at that price were, not ready to go invest. Would have been a good idea if they had. But so I later persuaded them to let me make a personal investment, so I did.
And who were the other, or if you can say, the other investors?
So Selena Chow, I think, was another investor at Horizons Ventures, was a lead investor the second time around. And there was a firm out of Chicago, Pritzker Capital, maybe some small personal investors as well.
And the board who was on the board of Viv Labs? Yeah.
A representative from Horizons Ventures and one from Pritzker Capital, I think, are the two. I mean, the outside board directors. And I served as, I was an observer and advisor and a friend of the company.
But you were not hands-on the way you were with Siri?
Not in Viv. In Adam's new company, again, I took a more direct role and both an investor, a meaningful investor personally, and a board director. We worked with a firm called B Capital, so working on that one.
And so tell me about Viv.
So Viv's, again, this is Dag Kittlaus spinning a vision. So Adam said, I'm going to take all the learnings that we had from the first time around, and we're going to build a new and better version of Siri. And we're going to build this, and we're going to, at this time, this was actually being designed to find another partner. Samsung was the best available partner. But it was clear that to compete with Siri, you needed a distribution channel. And at this point, the smartphone market had matured, and this was designed to be in the Android ecosystem principally, because Apple now had Siri. Android didn't have a competitive product.
And I mean, Android they sort of tried, but they never managed.
Google Assistant was not well product managed. I mean, it has usage, but it's not. Do you hear people raving about Google Assistant? I don't know how many people use it. People do, I guess, but.
And I mean, Alexa in some ways was more of a competitor, but why I'm asking you things outside your direct knowledge, but I mean, why did Alexa not get entered into the smartphone market?
Yeah, that's a story. So one of the iterations of, we had talked to various partners over time, talking with Amazon, the Amazon team. This seems to be typical for Seattle companies, interviewed carefully and tried to ask as many technical questions as they could because they were building their own. And there was never really a serious intention to acquire the company or partner with the company. There was only an intention to drain as much competitive information as you could. So I kind of fault Amazon for not being open with their intentions about that. And Alexa, we thought at first Alexa was going to be a serious competitor. Alexa's kind of turned into a joke in the sense that it doesn't work very well. The speech recognition is not that good. The intent understanding is not at all good, and it provides it is a quirky service that provides random pieces of information, and it's not very high utility to anybody, as best I can tell.
So when Samsung, were they looking for a Siri-like product, or were you approaching them with Viv? Because I'm wondering, why didn't Samsung, for instance, go to Amazon and say, hey, we want
Alexa?
Or Google do the same? Well, good, there's...
Yeah, I think Samsung wanted its own signature product, and I think Samsung was enamored with, this is the team that built Siri. Siri is the leadership product in the space at that time, and this is a newer, better version. This is how we will compete with Apple and win. I think that was their...
You've sold me.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you were looking, or they were looking for a potential partner, and Samsung was almost the only one of that stature, right?
And, I had cautioned the team that Samsung has a different managerial culture than the USA companies, and that they are very focused on, Korean leadership and management, and that they're as an American you would have a lesser rank and status in an organization like that. That's one issue for you. And a second issue is you can't expect the same level of openness and candor that you might expect in an American company. That there will be things you don't know. Turns out that both of those proved quite problematic. But I'm not going to tell tales out of school. This is for Dag and Adam to share if they choose.
No, I'm wondering more about the vision, and it sounds like that makes sense. But again, that sort of what was your word for it? But the model of having the service providers with that business model, was that something Samsung was interested in?
Yes, I think so, because Dag, Adam, and Chris Brigham at this point launched the product with an SDK and an ecosystem with the desire, and indeed the SDK was available to the Samsung development community to extend this to serve various e-commerce providers or other service providers, web services providers. And that was at the time of launch of Viv, now known as Bixby. Again, Samsung proved very difficult to be part of, I think, for the team. Dag fairly early pulled the ripcord and managed to, I'll let him tell the story, but managed to vest his shares in the course of it. Very clever. Adam stayed a little longer and eventually eventually left as well. And yeah, so I sometimes think this team is so talented they should join forces again sometime in the future. Maybe they will.
And Viv was starting to be in the early deep learning stuff. Did they incorporate any of that into, or were they sticking more with what they'd done with Siri?
Yeah, they had advanced the machine learning considerably. I don't recall that's a question for Adam. I don't recall that they were using neural networks extensively. They were doing very advanced ontology modeling and very advanced knowledge management, knowledge modeling, so that the AI was much more sophisticated with respect to request understanding, recognition, disambiguation, intent disambiguation, and service providing. And they built a very sophisticated SDK and developer tool set so that it was very quickly extensible under the right leadership. Without that team in place, Bixby has stalled, is my impression. It's still around, but and it has users and adherents. And I just saw an analysis that looked at Siri, Bixby, and Google Assistant. Surprisingly, Bixby is the one that answered the most questions correctly and provided the most user services correctly. So the technology that the Siri, now Viv team built that became Bixby is still relatively advanced, even though the team is elsewhere.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the most recent one that if you can talk about.
Sure. So Adam saw white space in the market, and his vision, again, Adam's best to tell the story, but I'll just give a quick overview. Adam's vision was that Siri provided a next level user interface, but the white space in the market was that many people, we talked about a virtual assistant to help you solve your problems. What if you had, but the real problem that you have is you want to make better decisions. And every individual and every organization in the end, analysis, everyone is the sum product of all the decisions you make in life, large and small. And so how is it that you help people make better decisions across a very wide range of decisions? And what is it that decisions have in common across all the dimensions of value that you might want to achieve by making that decision? So Adam is very systematic, set up to solve this problem in a systematic way. And I thought that was a sufficiently compelling vision, and I know Adam, when he sets his mind to something, get out of the way. It's going to happen. So we embarked on that. He built a team. I provided financing. Gabe Greenbaum of B Capital was co-invested, and we set off to build a company. Here's a story. So I think 2021 was, is that right? I think it was 2021 when the company was first launched. And with this vision, and then Adam slowly built up an engineering team, fleshed out the vision, began very clever technology to go out, harvest information from the internet, and to use that in a clever way to help frame decisions and help you, form a decision, present visual information, present AI-based information to help you think through decisions. So, from everything from, what home to purchase, where to send your kids to college, what services to provide, how to finance your mortgage, you name a decision, all the important decisions in your life. How would you like to have a great coach to help you with that? And so I said, that's compelling. There's a value proposition here. We'll figure out how to monetize it. What's the business associated with this? And then November of 2022 comes ChatGPT, November 29th, I think it was. And and I start playing with it, and by like December 1st or 2nd or 3rd, I said, stop the presses. It's like, we got to rethink this, because all the services we're providing, and we're trying to, find ways to monetize and so forth, are here for free. And what the generalized pre-trained transformers had achieved was, through Common Crawl and other means, had basically taken all the information from the internet, provided a natural language interface, and then it created the ability to create a structured output on demand across the entire range of human knowledge on the internet. Just an astonishing achievement, and done it with neural network technology. So we needed to rethink the model and rethink it fast. So next leg of the story is, and so we had a series of fairly intense meetings, let's just say, in January, where I think the team is on a mission, their heads down, they're focused. It's like, guys, you got to stop, you got to look at this, and you have to rethink it. So they started to play with the new technology and said, okay, we see it, this is right. Maybe we can build some hybrid here that incorporates all the advances that we've made, but also incorporates this new technology into a new value proposition. And so they began to do that, and they did that through the spring and summer of 2023. And by the fall of 23, we're going out for financing. A recruiter, of all people, for Airbnb just said, you can go hire a team and so forth. You can go try to build a team with said this to Brian Chesky of Airbnb, but said, you can try to go build your own team, but I'm telling you, the best way to get the AI that you want, the best in the world, is to hire the best people in the world. And that person's Adam Cheyer, and he's got a team. It's a ready team, but you're going to have to pay up to buy it, but you guys can afford it. And Brian Chesky met Adam Cheyer, and again, there was an entrepreneurial bonding, a vision bonding, And Chesky said, okay, I'm in. This is the right approach. We need, what'll it take? Again, a negotiation. Everybody's happy. Adam's a wealthy man. We all did fine. So.
Yeah, and I saw Brian Chesky at the present at the Wired big interview thing last couple months ago. And yeah, really exciting. I mean, you think of Airbnb as being just hotels, or stays, but it's a lot more than that. He's got a really compelling kind of.
He's visionary. He's a driven leader, and he's a very gifted leader. I think very hands-on on the one hand, in terms of engaging with people, and very delegating on the other, and giving you space to execute, but also being there and engaged in the details, much as Steve Jobs was. I think he really studied Steve Jobs as a pattern about how to drive excellence in the organization down to leaf level engineers in the organization on the one hand, but still leave people empowered so you're not micromanaging and making decisions. You're just there engaged, and people, you're there having the dialogue, driving the thought processes, but leaving people to do the work.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what comes out.
Adam will stay until it's successful, is my prediction. His team will stay until it's successful, and I think he's Adam and I have talked frequently in the past. We're talking less frequently now because I think he's heads down and working really hard.
Yeah. Now, when we interviewed him for Chatbots last spring, I mean, he was very busy, but he made time.
Yep.
But he said he was just
slammed.
So sort of, you wanted to talk a bit about the parallels with the attention model.
Yes.
And
yes.
The last thing I wanted to ask, just to sort of fill it, your life since 2005, Siri has been a big part of it, but that's not all of it.
Oh.
So, maybe just briefly, do in whichever order you want,
sure.
but briefly sketch in sort of the main points in your other activities to fill in the last 15 years since Luann Johnson did it.
Sure. So, again, coming back to Siri, I think this is one of the big stories in the computer industry, and I'm glad that Computer History Museum is telling this story. I think it's inspiring to entrepreneurs, but it's part of the lore and legend. It has as much place, I think, as Xerox PARC or General Magic in terms of its impact on the industry, and that impact is still in place today by the Siri product, but also across the ecosystem. And it will, the new thing for Mustafa Suleiman at Microsoft is virtual personal assistants. OpenAI and Sam Altman are trying to drive a virtual personal assistant. Oh, wait, it's going to be agentic 15 years later. So the level of innovation and the advancement of that team 15, 17 years ago is still being felt today and being played out in the marketplace. I think that's the kind of story that CHM needs to share to create a vision of what's possible for the tech community, the entrepreneurial community, and to tell the story of people's lives, because people have lived through this. So the attention model. I described earlier where we used machine learning to do statistical analyses, and you essentially create ordered lists of 1 through 10 probabilistics, for speech from phoneme to syllable to word, and to phrase, for natural language understanding to phrase within context. But intent was all about context. So you really had to go from everything we would start at the word level, but you'd get to the entire phrase and you try to get the entire context, and you say, how do I infer intent from this series of words, and did I get the words right? Did the speech recognition engine get the words right Did I get the phrases right? Did I get do I get the intent right? And now can I map it into a domain and to accomplish a mission on behalf of the user? The attention model for transformers does the same things. It looks at the context. It has a series of tokens. You know all this, but it has a series of tokens. And those tokens are associated with adjacent vectors in a high dimensionality space. It does an approximate nearest neighbor search in a vector space, a high dimensionality vector space. And it now says, okay, here's a set of nearest neighbors of vectors. Now I'm going to say these things are related, and I'm going to look for the relationships, and I'm going to have all of the attributes do cross-correlation amongst the attributes. And that cross-correlation, my argument to you is, and I'm not positive of this, Marc, but I think this is right. My belief is that cross-correlation is kind of doing what we were doing in terms of taking these different attributes of speech, words, phrases, meaning, intention, and we were looking for the same correlations, trying to do that at admittedly very crude level. So here it's done at a very sophisticated level with a huge space of all of human knowledge brought in from the internet. But that cross-correlation of attribute information is similar, not the same, similar. I would say analogous. I'm not even sure it's similar. It's analogous. You're just looking for those. You're looking for the correlations to say where do you see it's. You're looking for signal. Right? Where do I see signal of meaning? And the transformer in the attention model finds signal and meaning much in the same way as we were finding signal and meaning by cross-correlating and then finding if you're going through your top list of 10, just like the top one is not right every time. Even though you think that's the top one for this domain, for this measure, this attribute, it's not. The one down here is. So that's I think that's my analogy. Not sure it's perfect, but it makes sense to me.
But when it makes me think, in a way, the Siri team was building by hand what comes out almost by this giant brute force approach reveals these relationships after sifting through this unbelievable mass of data. Whereas, it's not that you were purely rules-based, which would be truly by hand. There's statistical machine learning involved, but basically trying to build up, with some understanding of how the domains relate to each other, presumably through Tom and all of this work in ontologies
and Adam especially. But yes,
true. And but building up, not processing everything and then figuring out what comes out, but the result can be very similar. So in that you're triangulating meaning from these various dimensions.
That's exactly right, and that's why I make the analogy to say, well, wait. Siri was doing it in this different form, machine learning, statistical probability, cross-correlation among the different modes and measures of information that capture. And here, transformers and AI are doing in this high dimensionality vector space with transformers and attribute matching. Yes, it's much more brute force. It's also much more general, and it's much more automatic. And it also gets better with scale. Ours was not brute force. It was surgical. It was rules based. It was generalized in some ways because it was machine learning. But it also embedded certain amount of rule knowledge about meaning and speech and natural language and dialogue and intent and domain knowledge. So it was really being able to find signal across that path. But this was a fairly special purpose interaction in the Siri case versus a completely general purpose question answering system for AI, which is pretty much magical and will be transformative in the future.
But presumably when it's a do engine, but I'm thinking, having the human control or it not be, obviously a hallucination is more important if you're ordering physical things in the real world. So I'm thinking the fact that it was to some extent hand-built is more important when you're having something do things for you than when it's simply providing information.
Yeah, it is. It is, to some extent, you can, the error bars are smaller. You're able to predict its behavior and constrain its behavior in more tightly. And maybe that's why they've been slow in getting the agent technology out, because they got to solve that problem one way or another. So, the do engine was a compelling, important idea. It is an important part of the future, and it was there 15 years ago, and it's languished. What can I tell you? And we'll see whether 2025 introduces that. There's a lot of talk about it now. I have yet to see compelling products. There are, some beta products in the hands of some users, I think, for OpenAI, and others are threatening to release product. But it will be. They say this is the next. It's broadly believed that this is the next leg of the AI, is agentic AI, and I think that has to be true necessarily.
Whatever you call it, it's clear you wanted to do things.
You wanted to do things. It was a do engine, right? Yeah.
And I mean, certainly Salesforce has put a lot of energy behind this.
They have,
model.
yeah. I mean, Marc Benioff is a believer in this idea.
Yeah. So to your career, I guess it's really 20 years since you did that. I was thinking 15 because it's Siri. But so other than Siri, what have you done in the last 20 years?
And have I stopped beating my wife? So let me answer the question in the following ways. So I'm 76 now. Along the way, I founded 2 companies, took one public, sold another at, $500 million, and then served on 40 boards of directors and made 400 investments with my partners. Raised 11 funds, $4 billion in capital raised, many billions more returned. And at some point you have to say, what do I want to do with my time in life? So we have, I've sort of, our firm is spun into 3 different organizations, all venture capital firms, all funded, all doing well. I kind of, by 2017, began sort of the slow glide into partner retirement. Having said that, I'm still active in a variety of things. I helped Adam in 2021 get his company started. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun. I'm enjoying right now 2 things. One is I try to stay very current on the state of art AI. I hope I've communicated that adequately.
That seems to have worked.
Thank you. I try. And secondly, I'm very, very interested in AI applications in biology and molecular biology and biomedicine. So genetic editing, gene editing, and then applying AI to medical applications. So I serve on the foundation board for the Gladstone Institutes. I don't know if you know it. Yeah, so it's not widely known. They have 2 Nobel laureates on staff. They have Jennifer Doudna, who invented the CRISPR technology for gene editing. They have Shinya Yamanaka, who is who invented or discovered induced pluripotent stem cells. Both of these are discoveries, not inventions. Induced pluripotent stem cells, so-called Yamanaka factors, which basically cause a mature adult cell to revert to earlier stages of development. Why is this important? My belief is that, war on cancer started 50 years ago, very little progress made. Biology is a high dimensionality space. We can go down a rabbit hole here. I'll try to make it high level. there are 200,000 proteins, 20,000 genes in the human body, 200,000 proteins. Pairwise combinations is 20 billion pairs, actually 40 billion divided by 2. 20 billion pairwise combinations. To map out that is an impossible human endeavor. It will never happen with humans driving the process. It can only be with AI driving the process. So AI has to drive advances in biology and medicine. And indeed, we have seen it happen with the AlphaFold. You've probably seen where prediction of protein folding, this was not a solvable problem with conventional AI, but neural networks and transformers have been successful in predicting actual proteins to the point where it's a solved problem now. So within the space of 1-2 years, within the space of a year, all the human proteins were understood, and within the space of 2 years, every protein for every species on the planet has been now mapped, modeled, and the structure is predicted. That's a precursor to being able to build drugs and to intervene in the biological processes, disease processes, and also agricultural and other uses for engineering. So my belief is that the best way to improve the human condition going forward is to solve all the medical problems that confront humanity. All the diseases, all the the autoimmune diseases, all the diseases associated with neurological disease, immunological diseases of aging, the whole works. So this is a way to improve the human condition, and I just plan to spend what time and career I have left in trying to make a difference.
And on the biology end, though, a lot, of course, has been made of artificial intelligence advancing while human intelligence remains fairly static. But do you? Do you have any interest in the other side of it, which is souping up biology for intelligence?
Yeah. So, I actually, so this whole wide-ranging conversation.
This is the conclusion.
Yeah. I'll try to wrap up. I'll try to.
I'm just saying that I'm asking you these.
Yeah.
Personally, I find a lot of the questions that we ask about the future of AI feel to me a little bit circumscribed, whereas the biology angle is what's really unknown. Because also, a super intelligent machine is great, but if we're the same, what's, all we, as Minsky is attributed, if we're lucky, they'll keep us as pets or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the artificial superintelligence issue and who's in control of, is this a tool for humanity to use, or are we now a pet species, we hope.
But on the biology side, it sounds like you're talking toward the biological end and the excitement that could be done with merging artificial intelligence and biological.
I'm excited by the uses of computing in assisting education, because I think our educational system is wallowing in a 19th century paradigm of K through 12 education and Committee of 10 so-called curriculum. So K through 10 education was established in 1856 by, what's his name? Anyway, brought in from Prussia. And so this was a bucket line assembly process in the 18th century of Prussia. It was brought in the 1850s. In Horace Mann was the fellow's name, and in the 1890s, the Committee of 10 ratified the curriculum that is taught to this day in K through 12 schools, almost without a K through 12 curriculum, almost without change from 1890s. So this is a very hidebound process. It's everybody moves at the same pace. Clearly, people don't learn at the same pace. Learning needs to be personalized. It needs to be interactive. It needs to be gamified. It needs to be, to have levels and achievement and use all of the tools that make you want to learn. So I began my career at Stanford in computer-based instruction and using AI in instruction, I still believe that that's a powerful idea. To your broader point, what does AI mean for the rest of society? I think, we began this conversation offline. I think we're in a period of hyper change. And, the AI I mentioned will progress at the level of not an advance of 100 times in a decade. It will be 10,000 times in a decade, 100,000 times, maybe 1 million times in a decade, not sure. It will be extraordinary advance in intelligence, and maintaining control of that will be a challenge for humanity to make sure that the AI does not somehow become so intelligent that it starts to take control over humanity. And worst of all, that AI is good at dissembling its intention, builds the ability to deceive and uses that to gain control in a way that we don't want. So those are real questions, I would argue existential questions. I think they confront CHM, they confront all of humanity. As we sit here today, I don't have good answers for them. I hope that Ilya Sutskever does, because I know he's working on this. I wish him luck. But in the meantime, I think there's extraordinary advances in the human condition that are possible. And I think biology and medicine, Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, says that he believes that in the next 5 to 10 years, 50 to 100 years of advancement in biology and biomedical science are possible because of AI. And I believe that to be true. We've progressed so slowly in terms of medicine, the efficacy, the ability to provide cures. We've a $1 trillion, well in excess of $1 trillion pharmaceutical industry. In the best case, it palliates, and you have to take a pill every day for the rest of your life. That's their business model. Making you healthy is not. And let alone curing any diseases that you might have. We can do better. We can and should do better. AI is the answer, has to be. So the real question is, how quickly can we progress toward that goal? That I think is a very compelling mission, and it's worth what time and energy I have left and choose to devote to these pursuits post a career in venture capital.
Wonderful. Anything you want to add, or is that?
No, it was fun talking with you. There's great questions. Most importantly, I think the Siri story is one that people need to understand, the vision, how advanced it was, how advanced the technology was over the competition, literally 15 years in some cases, and how much of a difference it has made in people's lives, and it can still. Because you mentioned the do engine, it's not there yet. It needs to be there, and life will change when it is. And I think we may be at the cusp of that change, let's hope.
And so I realize I did have done, I forgot that. And how is AI, do you see it, is it already, or will it change venture capital?
Certainly it streamlines research. I mean, we used to do, in the early days, you did library-based, competitive research. Then once things were online, you did web-based competitive research. Now you simply ask a query. You can do, deep research from Google, and you will get a full report, and it will go off and think about and analyze and do research for you. So expediting research is a very, very different approach right now, much faster. So it will compress, to some extent, the cycle of doing research. It will compress the cycle of, understanding different companies in the space, who's doing what, getting background information, and even doing preliminary evaluation, much as a venture capital associate would do. I still think partner judgment and human judgment is absolutely necessary. Really, this is a people business, and it's a team's business. It's a leadership business. You can't build a good company, a great company, without those qualities. And so there's an element of individual judgment. I don't think will go away, certainly not in the immediate future or near future, maybe even much longer. But I think all industries will change. And to some extent, there's always innovation. The venture capital industry is very innovative, and it even innovates amongst its own. And a lot of clever and talented people go into it, and they continue to find ways to innovate. There are some firms that get large and try to build franchises. Andreessen Horowitz is building a larger enterprise with a different structure and goal. And there's small boutique venture firms, and there are much larger venture firms seeking brand presence, market share, so forth. So I don't have a great answer for you for that question, other than to say it will change the process fundamentally. It will also expedite, the piece parts of the process. Writing a contract, just kick it out, right? So. Term sheet, memorandum of understanding, it's like, it's like hit a button. All these things are things that you would work on for half a day or whatever to draft something as a document of agreement between people. Here it's trivially easy. So it's an exciting time. It'd be fun to be doing this now. The midst of change is very quick, and the people who adopt the new technologies are always the ones who are more agile and leaders.
Yeah, I could ask you all day. Because you meant with the smart contract stuff, which is, do you think changing actual transactions and contract? It can draft a contract for you instantly, but do you see crypto and AI as changing some of the mechanics of?
Well, one of our companies, in a company in, Canvas Ventures was a venture capital firm I co-founded. So they invested in a company called CaseText. CaseText was sold for $600 million to LexisNexis, and LexisNexis is using this to be an AI assistant for law firms, and it's basically a product that really replaces a first-year paralegal legal associate, does all the work that you would expect a young legal associate to do, to prepare briefs, to do case law research, to do statute research, to present basic arguments in favor of a given position, and then really prepare something for a more senior lawyer to present to a client, take into the court, et cetera. So automating a lot of the legal profession. So this is just one example. This is you've seen this for doctors as well, where the diagnoses coming out of the best AI models at this point are as good as or better than your typical doctor. And it's not surprising. These are very complex areas, and to expect an individual to know all the symptoms of some particular condition for every human being that walks into the office is a very hard problem. So over time, these will displace a lot of human effort and maybe a certain number of human jobs, probably a lot. But at the same time, they're going to make everything more affordable and higher quality. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, and a lot of change that's coming that will disrupt certain people's lives. That's always the case with automation in any form. And you want to buffer that as much as possible for the people involved, but to hold it back basically denies everybody else the value and the goods and services that would result from those lower cost services. So automation is the answer for better living standards for everybody in the world, literally everybody in the world. And so this is something that we should welcome on the one hand, while trying to make sure that the people who are affected are, their lives are made better in all the ways you can, and you ease what transitions they have to make as best you can. It's not an easy task, but
Well said.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
my pleasure.